Happy Wednesday. I'm Beverly Hosford, and this is my friend Erin Nitschke. We are live for the National Federation of Professional Trainers, the NFPT, and we're going to have a little fun today with Halloween border. Happy post-Halloween, everyone. We're talking about sleep today, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but first, check in, say hello, tell us where you are. I'm in Montana, and Erin is in Wyoming. So we're wondering, where are you watching from? And Erin, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm good. It's snowing here.
But
it's a real light. I'm looking out my office window right now, and it's just like a real light, like those big fat flakes. So it's kind of pretty, but looks really cold.
Yeah, it's snowing here too, and I have to admit, even though I love the snow, I was a little grumpy about it this morning. I was like wanting to get a workout in today and wanting to go outside, but not wanting to go through like the layering process. I did it anyway because my husband threatened me. He was like, "Well, if you're not going, I'm going," and I'm like, "All right." So
okay.
I was like, I don't want to sit in the house all the way until the live show. I was like, I need to get out there. I need to move my body a little bit. So because
wake yourself up.
Yeah, we sit for the whole day when we're working. So I got out there, and it was actually really nice. It was like peaceful, and nobody else was out with their dogs this morning. So I let the girls run around off leash in the park, and
nice
and quiet. And yeah, it's like, it's kind of like you got to just like make friends with the snow again every year. Like, all right, no, we're going to do this. Yeah.
It's going to be here whether we will it to or not. So we kind of got to get to a point where we embrace it.
Yeah. Totally. So if you're just tuning in, tell us, is it snowing where you are? Is it getting cold? Yes, no. And then most importantly, tell us, did you sleep well last night? Yes or no? What about you, Erin? How'd you sleep last night?
I actually did sleep pretty well. At least I think I did. I don't remember waking up at all, but yeah, I did. So
that's good. Yeah, and I guess it's like, what does sleeping well really mean? Like, I think sleeping well means, Erin and I just finished a course through the University of Michigan, and I think that what is the sheet you do at the end? You call that a rubric. They say, did you sleep 7 to 8 hours last night? Did you go to bed an hour, or did you turn off your electronics an hour before you slept? There's like all these things. So I guess everyone defines sleeping well differently, but we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the hormones and the mechanisms for sleep, and why, like, maybe if you're getting 7, 8, 9 hours a night, you may not be feeling that great, which was me for a long time. Like, I always prided myself on getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night, but never always felt totally rested. And now I'm starting to understand that more. And I'm understanding that today because I definitely did not get as good of a night's sleep last night as I wanted, because 3 nights ago, I got an amazing night's sleep. And so the next night I stayed up too late. So
yes,
for it now. And that's one of the weird things about sleep is you can get a really good night's sleep and feel really crappy the next day, or you can not get a good night's sleep and feel really good the next day. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today, like why that is, because there's some different hormones playing in. So let's see. Myra says, yes, we all slept well last night. I didn't know what to expect after Halloween.
Yeah, definitely.
Myra says, hi. April says, I'm in Lafayette. Burr. Sweet.
I'll bet.
Great. So if you're just joining us, tell us, how did you sleep last night? Did my question disappeared. Did you sleep well last night? Yes or no? I'll put it back up. All right. We got our fun Halloween border. Erin, can you see our Halloween border?
I'm so bummed. I can't see it. All I see is like you in the center, the question, and like me down here in the corner that's really tiny.
So tell us if you slept well last night, and tell us where you are. Where in the world are you? Oh, we've got a few more. Let me just say hi to a few people here. Billy says, mine was off and on the last few nights. April says, nope, always interrupted. My daughter's having issues staying asleep, which affects me. Yeah, so.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. I mean, I know some people, I like sleeping through the night. I like it when I go to bed and I don't wake up until the morning. And from what I'm learning, that's pretty much the marker of healthy sleep. It may be okay to wake up like once a night from what the researchers said at Michigan. And I guess back in the old days, people actually used to wake up in the middle of the night and do things and then go back to sleep. So sort of interesting. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about some of these hormones that you may have learned about sometime in a science class or maybe when you're getting certified. The first one that I really want to talk about is cortisol. So if you know what cortisol is, say yes. And if you don't know what cortisol is, say no. So cortisol is our wakefulness hormone. It's what keeps us awake. It's what helps us be awake. And it's really beneficial because without it, we wouldn't be awake. And but we know that too much cortisol can be stressful for the body. It can cause us to retain fat and it can cause problems. And cortisol is kind of neat because it operates on a rhythm. You have something called a circadian rhythm, which is your body's general rhythm around like the lightness and the darkness. And cortisol generally works with it. It starts rising at 3 a.m. So it actually is at its lowest, like I think around maybe midnight or earlier in the night, but it's starts rising at 3 a.m. But it's not supposed to be high enough that it wakes you up. But if you do wake up at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, some nights, that's probably why. It's because your cortisol is higher than it needs to be. And it keeps rising all the way until like 8, 9, 10 in the morning. And that's when it's supposed to get nice and high so that it wakes you up and you feel alert. And ideally, you don't really need coffee or caffeine. You just have that cortisol. And then cortisol starts dipping again. It starts dipping and get lower and lower until like the afternoon. It starts getting really low. And then all the way until bedtime, it just keeps getting lower. So cortisol, you can look at a cortisol graph and you'll see like how it rises, and then it starts dropping until bedtime. And ideally, it's on that rhythm. But when cortisol gets disrupted, it might be too high or too low. And if it's too high, it prevents you from sleeping. And if cortisol is too low, it can actually just make you feel lethargic. But I don't know. Have you read anything, Erin, about whether people usually have high cortisol or low cortisol? I would say it's probably usually high for people.
I would say it's probably usually high. But sorry, there's like an echo. Do you hear that?
No.
Okay, good. So with cortisol, one thing that I've read a lot about is just when you wake up in the morning and if you're somebody that needs to grab that caffeine right away, whether it's because you really need it or because it's just part of a habit, like a habitual kind of ritual that you do, if you do that before 9 or 10 in the morning, it can disrupt that cortisol cycle. Mm-hmm. And so what I tell a lot of people is, start your day with just a glass of water when you get up, especially if you're a really early riser because you've got to commute or, you've got to get kids to school or get them on the bus or something like that. Get yourself, whether it's ice water, whatever you like in the morning, but try to avoid the caffeine.
Right.
Because it will disrupt that cycle of cortisol.
Yeah, it's like if you're putting a bunch of caffeine into your system, then your body doesn't need to produce as much cortisol, and it gets used to that. And yeah, I think if you're gonna move your coffee habit later, don't do it all at once. Just gradually every day, move it like 10 minutes later until you get yourself. That's one thing I'm learning from Myra, who's our pediatric sleep coach that hangs out on our show. She has taught me all about doing things more gradually. Like if you're going to change with the time change, do it gradually. Don't do it all in one night. So I think the same thing with caffeine. And yeah, Myra and I have a running joke. We call it happy hour, like 9 or 10 a.m. when you can have your caffeine and it's not going to disrupt that cortisol too much. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was a great point that you brought up. And so yeah, and cortisol is cool. So like if you want to stay up later, so I said that I missed my bedtime the other night. I basically stayed up later than I should have. And when you do that, your body produces extra cortisol to keep you awake. And then you can usually go to sleep because of another hormone we'll talk about in a second here. You can usually still go to sleep, but then when it's time for cortisol to start rising again around 3 a.m., it might rise a little more peppy than it would normally because you boosted it before bed. You basically gave it a boost, and then it stays high, and it can stay high from what I've observed in my body for a couple days. And then for a couple days, you just don't feel right. I mean, actually you feel kind of good, with cortisol. It's kind of like a party hormone. It's like you go out to a concert, and you stay up too late, like cortisol is rushing and you're feeling good. So but the other hormone I want to talk about right away here is adenosine, and that's our sleep hormone. It's basically like a sleep pressure mechanism. So as soon as you wake up in the morning, adenosine starts building, and it keeps building and building until it's time for bed. And by the time for bed, ideally, it's built up really nicely so you can go to sleep. But if you have caffeine, again, it's going to suppress adenosine. So there's like a sweet spot in the morning, like you said, Erin, 9 or 10, that you should have your caffeine. But then if you have it too late, like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock even, I think the Michigan sleep researchers said 7 hours, right?
7 hours, avoid caffeine.
Yeah. So because if you have caffeine, it's going to block adenosine, and then you're not going to feel sleepy for bedtime. And then, you're going to build up the cortisol, and then it's just a kind of a mess without getting too into it. So anything else you want to talk about with adenosine? I mean, it basically just, as soon as you wake up, it builds.
Yeah, it does. It has hypnogenic properties. And so it does help us go to sleep. And so when we are taking in that caffeine, we're antagonizing adenosine. So we're kind of fighting against it a little bit. And so really the ideal window, and I think the other thing people might not realize about caffeine is it can remain in your system. It's not like you drink the cup of coffee and then caffeine goes away. It doesn't work that way. It's got lasting effects, and it usually takes about 30 minutes or so. I mean, that can vary between individual, but like 30 minutes before it actually kicks in. So you could have very easily finished your first cup of coffee before that caffeine starts kicking in. Right. And so you say you have a cup at 1 o'clock in the afternoon or even 2 o'clock, it might not have its effects until 2:30, and say your bedtime ideally is 8. Well, then you've messed with your adenosine and you've antagonized it a little bit. So it's going to be much more difficult to fall asleep. So try to avoid that caffeine like at least 7 hours before bedtime, because it does remain elevated in the system.
Just like alcohol, like drinking alcohol before bedtime might help you fall asleep. But then if you wake up in the middle of the night, that might be the factor, because the sugar releases later. And caffeine, has that half-life where even though it seems like it wore off and you're like outer conscious, it's still working inside to keep you awake. So adenosine. So what do you guys think about adenosine? If you like adenosine, say yes. If you don't like it, say no.
If you don't think you have any, tell us.
And with children, adenosine builds up, I think, a little faster, which is probably why they need to nap. And they need to nap when they're babies. They need to nap often because adenosine builds up, and so they need to take that nap. They get that sleep pressure more often. So, and that's something that Myra knows all about. So if anyone has questions about that, you could ask her in the comments. She's hanging out. So then the third hormone we want to talk about today is melatonin. So if you know what melatonin is, say yes. And if you don't know what melatonin is, say no. So melatonin is, most people know that it's it's like the sleep hormone. And melatonin starts rising a couple hours before you need to go to sleep. And that way it helps you go to sleep. And we know that if you ever heard, like, don't look at your cell phone before bed, it's because your cell phone light, blue light, it interferes with melatonin, it suppresses it, and then it makes it harder for you to go to sleep. So, and light in general suppresses melatonin, I think. So when you wake up in the morning, you're exposed to light, and then your body sets its circadian rhythm kind of off that and kind of off of our physiology. But melatonin likes to set itself up 2 hours before your bedtime. So if you change your bedtime every night, it kind of confuses melatonin. It also confuses cortisol. Adenosine probably just starts building every morning, no matter what, when you wake up. But cortisol and melatonin, from what I've learned, and when to go. And if you're changing your bedtime every night, like I did for 35 years, I pretty much every night went to bed. Like during the work week, I go to bed at like 8-ish, because I had to be up at 5. And then on the weekend, I would stay up till like midnight. Or 1, 2, and then I would sleep till 10. Now I do that. And so let's talk about why that is. Because basically, like, if you sleep in on the weekend, and then your melatonin and so I think that's why we don't feel normal again until Wednesday or Thursday, and then it's a weekend again.
Right. we kind of get ourselves into this vicious cycle, and we're not really keeping in tune with the rhythm, the natural rhythm of our body.
Right.
And then we're doing things on the weekends, like, you know, there's a lot of social engagements on the weekend typically. Not if you're an old mom like me. I pretty much don't want to leave my house because I don't have the energy to do it. But nonetheless, like flashing back to my college years, there was a lot of things to do on the weekend. And so your sleep rhythm would get off, and then that Monday morning would come and it's just agony. Like, why am I so exhausted? Well, it's because it jacked with my internal rhythm and my circadian rhythm. And if you've, had caffeine later because it's a weekend and you didn't really have to get up the next day, then you've really messed with cortisol and adenosine. And say you have alcohol, then just the cycle keeps churning. And so you don't ever really give your chance to get into a cycle that allows your body to, one, repair tissues the way that it needs to, allow your brain to remain healthy the way it needs to. And just for that stress relief component, our bodies need that rest. And now we've got all of these electronics at our fingertips, literally all day, all night. And that blue spectrum light is another antagonist. So it tends to keep us awake. And it is problematic, especially now if people are answering emails before bed or, just that kind of stuff right there. You don't realize how those little things will build up over time because it's not something that you're conscious of.
Yeah.
It's not like you look at your phone and you automatically feel awake. It's the time that it takes for that rhythm to be disrupted.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to do 2 episodes. So next week, we're going to give you 10 ways to, at least 10 ways to get this all sorted out if you're just all jacked up, because sometimes it can be hard to know where to start. But today we really want to talk about like the mechanisms behind it. And so, like Erin is saying, everything gets off track. And so these mechanisms, melatonin, cortisol, adenosine, they're the things that are working behind the scenes to keep your sleep rhythm on track. And if you throw it off, then you have to get them back on track. And it can take some work. You've got to be committed to it. And one thing I want to say before I look at some of these comments is like, just think about your heartbeat for a second. Like your heart beats on a rhythm. It beat, beat, beat. And it goes up when you exercise and it goes down when you sleep. And just imagine what it would be like if your heartbeat was off rhythm all the time and it's constantly and you're constantly changing it, you would feel really strange. It's kind of the same thing with your circadian rhythm and your cortisol rhythm. It's just that we don't notice those or we don't pay attention to it as much. I mean, I notice it now that I know about it. I notice it.
Right.
Like after I go to bed too late, I feel like a rock star the next morning because my cortisol is pumping. It's nice and high. And then it's high for a couple days, but then it drops like it's like a drug, and then it drops off, and then you feel it crappy. And then you finally get that good night's sleep and you don't feel better from it because then your cortisol levels drop again. And it's like a roller coaster. It's like the cortisol is high, the cortisol is low. You throw in the caffeine in there randomly when you feel like it, and your body just doesn't know what to do. And you just kind of feel like you're drugged. So the more I've paid attention to this, the more I've realized it. And now I'm just like, we'll talk about the habits a little more next week. But let's see here. April brought up something that we wanted to talk about. We take melatonin. Should there be a certain hour in the middle of the night that you avoid it? If my daughter wakes at 1, should I not give her melatonin? Well, we are definitely not doctors to be, prescribing or talking about melatonin, but we did learn some things in our sleep class about melatonin. And I think melatonin is a great drug to help you go to sleep, but I don't know if it can really help you go back to sleep, especially if cortisol is high. I don't know if melatonin is powerful enough to overcome. Like if your cortisol levels are high because you stayed up too late, I don't know that melatonin can overtake it. And I think that's why melatonin doesn't work sometimes. And Erin has some other reasons why she thinks melatonin doesn't always work. You want to share those? Yeah,
I worry a little bit about it just because melatonin is something our bodies endogenously produce. So within, it's like cholesterol. We produce a certain amount of cholesterol endogenously. Our bodies just take care of that physiological process. So we've already got melatonin in our body. And then when you take an exogenous source, you're dumping more of that same manufactured product into the body. And so it really doesn't have a place to go. there are very few people that would have like that type of disorder that would require those prescriptive levels of melatonin. And one of the things that they brought up in our course was, you know, depending on the type of melatonin, so if it's a supplement, there are studies out there that have shown that what's actually in the product is not what's on the label. So on the label, it could be advertising that, oh, you have so many milligrams or micrograms, whatever the unit of measure is, in this product. But when they actually did a third-party study and checked that quality and purity, the levels were far off, and in fact contained a fraction of really what they were saying was in it. So I just caution people about that. So, and I always say, like, go to your primary care provider. And if it's something that they have provided you and have given you guidance on, and you've talked with like a sleep scientist or something like that, I don't think you can really go wrong following their advice. I don't know if Myra might have any other thoughts on that, because she is a pediatric sleep coach, and I know that she mentioned her daughter maybe like waking up. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents about melatonin. It's not a bad thing by any means, but just always exercise caution when you're taking an exogenous source of something that isn't, that you're not naturally producing and then dumping. It's kind of like taking an extra protein. Like, yeah, where's it going to go? Because you already have, it's a ubiquitous macronutrient in your body.
Yeah, definitely. And Myra says, Myra's reminding us, Myra's a gentle sleep coach for kids, which is awesome.
Myra's awesome.
Reminding us one step at a time, which that's what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to give you a whole bunch of options next week, some small changes that you can make. And so definitely make sure you tune in for that. Myra also says social influences are huge for sleep habits also. Yeah, like we were talking about. Billy had a couple interests. Oh, wait, here we go. Myra, I was looking for melatonin can suppress your REM sleep, which backfires later. There you go. There's your answer. So melatonin can have a backwards effect. And as I was saying, like, yeah, it could probably cortisol. If you've got cortisol rushing through your body, I don't know there's anything that can lower it unless you get more sleep. Like, you have to basically get over like this hump, like the cortisol is high and you have to sleep enough to like get the cortisol back down, and it's hard. It takes a lot of sleep to bring cortisol back down, as I'm learning. Yes. Which I could talk about a little more next week. I want to address, Billy asked a couple questions here. Let me see if I can find it. Billy wants to know, what about its role in relation to blood flow to the organs? I'm not sure if he's talking about cortisol.
Caffeine or?
Oh, maybe caffeine. Yeah, and we're going to do an episode on caffeine in a couple weeks, so we'll talk about caffeine more in that episode. But Billy, if you can let us know which you're referring to. And Billy says, what about CBD oil? I don't even know what that is. What is CBD oil? Myra, do you know what CBD oil is? I mean, here's the bottom line, guys. Like, it's just like when you're trying to like you're trying to lose weight or something. You can't eat enough greens and vegetables and fruits to overcome eating bad food. And you can't exercise enough to overcome eating bad food. You can't take enough supplements or do enough things to overcome habits. Like, if you're not going to bed on time and you're drinking caffeine like late in the day, it doesn't matter how much lavender you smell or guzzle, or you could bathe yourself in it. Like, we tried all that with my son when he was a baby. We tried putting lavender on him and giving him a massage and doing all these things. And until we made sure he was getting naps regularly, that's a big problem with kids. Usually they don't get enough naps. He wouldn't sleep well. And unless I go to bed on time, I don't really sleep as good. And I'm a special case because I've been chronically sleep deprived all year. So I've got a little bigger of a hump to get over. But
yeah, I think moms are that way in that first couple of years. I swear it takes 3 years. Really.
Really? You want to know about adenosine and blood flow to organs. So he asked this question earlier. He said,
this is related. Oh, I was thinking that was CBD oil. I'm like,
what about its role in
adenosine's
relation to blood flow to organs? So, I'm not really sure. We'd have to kind of look that up.
Yeah, I'd have to do some research on that. Sorry, I thought you were talking about that was the answer to the CBD oil. And I'm like, what now?
Yeah,
I'm lost.
totally. April wants to know, Myra, if it can lead to
Oh,
sleepwalking. Taking melatonin? Ooh,
great question.
that's a really good question. And yeah, and Myra, I think, works with kids up to a certain age. I don't know how old your daughter is, April, but once kids get to a certain age, I think they're treated as adults. And so that's a little bit different. But Myra might actually still know the answer to that. Sleepwalking is definitely, we learned, is a sleep disorder. There's actually a lot of sleep disorders out there that we learned about in the course through the University of Michigan. And yeah, we learned all about these rhythms. You know, they showed us some really beautiful charts and these rhythms. And you know, without getting into too much of what we're going to talk about next week, the main thing is consistency. Like, you've just got to be consistent, just like with exercise. Like, you've got to be consistent with exercise and eating, and consistent with your sleep, because you really can throw off a lot of mechanisms in the body. And so if you're watching, tell us which hormone you found the most interesting: melatonin, adenosine, or cortisol. I'm just curious, like, which hormone do you find to be the most fascinating? I'm so dorky.
We're both dorky. You fit with me, Bev.
I want to make sure I throw up. So we had one of our authors research sleep. I want to make sure. Oops, I didn't mean to put it in there. I wanted to put it in the comments. We have one of our authors write a research article. Let's just chat about that for a minute. Oh, I did it again. I want to put it in the comments so that people can find it. So Kathleen kind of looked up like the most recent research, and as far as personal trainers go, like, there's definitely a lot of reasons why personal trainers should be paying attention to their clients' sleep habits, because it affects performance. It affects, you know, focus. It affects precision in sports. It affects endurance. And that we should talk about that. Like, if your clients are not getting enough sleep or not getting high quality sleep, they're likely not seeing the results that they want to see for so many reasons. One reason maybe because their hormone levels are all off, and we know that cortisol and adenosine and melatonin, they're right up there with like growth hormone and some of these other ones that we need to build muscle and to lose weight. And we know if cortisol is too high, we hold on to, well, I don't know if we hold on to fat, but I know that we tend to eat more when our cortisol is high. I eat more when my cortisol is high.
Stress hormone. Our body is responding to a physiological stress.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can definitely prevent someone reaching their fitness goals.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other things that it's so important for personal trainers, and I think physicians too, I mean, that's one question that I feel like should be on an intake form, is how well do you sleep? It's not just how much do you drink per week and do you use tobacco. It needs to be what are your sleep patterns like? Because one of the things we learned in this course was 3 out of 10 adults, working adults, get less than the necessary amount of sleep, so less than 6 hours a night, which could easily translate into 3 out of 10 of your clients are sleep deprived. So if you think about it in those terms, it's something that really drives home the point that, I might not be a sleep expert or a sleep scientist or, you know, a doctor of a circadian rhythm or whatever, but you still need to pay attention to, is my client not sleeping well enough? Is that the secret to why their numbers aren't budging, or they just aren't feeling like they're getting enough energy here or there to accomplish whatever task? So I thought that was really interesting, and it made me think about it in those terms, like, 3 out of 10 of my students are sleep deprived, and probably that number is a little bit higher for college age kids. I'm just going to go ahead and make that assumption, but I think it's important that it's a very real statistic. This is not something that's a rarity. If anything, it's more the rule than the exception to the rule. Like, those that are well rested are the exception to the rule. So I think we need to pay attention to that as fitness professionals.
So true. Yeah. I think we all know that sleep is important, but I think that sometimes when it comes to what a good night's sleep means or what it is, we're not really totally clear on that. And you might have a client come in one day and they feel totally rested, and they come in one day and they feel totally rested, but they didn't sleep well, and then they think that means like, oh, like, I got a bad night's sleep, but I still feel fine, so that means I don't need to sleep good. Or you might have a client come in and they got a great night's sleep, but they're not feeling well. And that's why we wanted to talk about these hormones today, because I know I ran into that over the years and I never understood it. And I think what it comes down to is, like, again, if you stay up too late, your body produces cortisol, and then you might feel amazing the next day, and you might even feel good for a couple days. But then if you do, then you go to bed earlier usually, because, like by the end of the day, the adenosine builds up and you feel tired or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you eventually, like, the cortisol starts to come out of your system, and then you start to feel bad, especially if you get a good night's sleep, because then that good night's sleep breaks down the cortisol, I think. And you, and then you're just not, then you're like, oh, I got a good night's sleep, but I feel icky today. And
and it's true. Once you're sleep deprived, there's no catching up on sleep. Like, it's not like you have a bank of hours that you can, withdraw from and deposit into. That's not how it works with our body. And so once we disrupt a rhythm, then we have to work very hard to get back in that rhythm. And so it's not something that it's like you stay up late the night before and maybe get 5 hours of sleep. Then you just go to bed early and, oh, all is well. Our bodies, unfortunately, just don't respond that way, because there's so many systems interacting with each other and sleep is the one component that every system absolutely needs to be able to function, to repair, to build, all of those things. And so I think sleep is one of those components of life that I wonder if people think it's a variable that you can manipulate. Mm-hmm. And be able to, oh, well, I didn't get that much sleep this night, so I'm going to go ahead and just, get 12 hours this night, and you wake up and you feel like crap. Well, because our bodies are not responding. So it's not a variable that you can and should manipulate, unless it's to try to solve an issue with the sleep pattern itself. Then, like Myra has already advised several times, is kind of that gradual, move the bedtime up 10 minutes early. So it's not all at once and kind of respond to, a change in time or something like that. But you have to get your body back in that rhythm. And unfortunately, that does take time. So I think people tend to get frustrated and then kind of give up on it. Like, if we're not seeing results the next day or the next week, then all of a sudden we're irritated and it's just not something that's working, which I can appreciate, because your irritability level goes up when you're tired.
Yeah.
So it's like you almost can never give yourself enough of a break. So don't think that it's something that you can just catch up on, because there are not deposits and withdrawals in that sense.
Right. Yeah, you bring up such a good point. Like, it's not just so quick. You can't just like go to bed later one night, go to bed earlier the next night. There's a lot of things happening in your body. It'd be like changing your breakfast every day. Like, you eat breakfast at 7 a.m. one morning, and then the next day you don't eat breakfast till 9 and you're starving. And then the next day you want to eat breakfast at 7 again, but your body's like not hungry yet. So then you eat breakfast, and it's like, I think that, hopefully that analogy helps a little. Or exercise, like, you exercise, you get in shape, you lose some weight, and then you let it go, and then you have to start over again. And it's the same thing with sleep. I think you're right. We take it for granted because it seems, I guess, because of cortisol. Amen to cortisol. Like, cortisol will just keep you awake. Like, it will keep you going. If you want to be awake, your body will produce that hormone and keep you awake. And I think that's why we take it for granted, because, like, imagine if you couldn't stay awake. Like, if like you at 9 p.m. you just fell over.
Right. Just lights out, done.
Like,
and
at 8 p.m., like, your left leg stops working, and at 8:30 your right leg stops working. Like, wouldn't that be nice, actually? Because, like, then
you could just shut off the day and be like, peace out, I'm done.
I gotta go to bed. My legs aren't working anymore. But because we can keep going, because we can, like, push it, I think that's, it's the same thing with exercise. Like, if you have an injury, you can usually push through it because your body will let you. Your body will make it happen. Your body is amazing, but you're going to pay for it later. You're going to have to pay the bank back.
Yeah, that's so true. And sleep it's such a mystery in some ways, but I mean, think about, like, way back when, Laura Ingalls Wilder days, I don't know, way back on the prairie, they really had to rely by sunrise and sunset. You couldn't just flip on a light, and so the human body has an amazing ability to adapt. Its adaptability is unbelievable, but unfortunately that means it also has the ability to adapt to bad habits. Mm-hmm. And that's something that will then take time to unravel and to kind of sort out and get back on a rhythm that's right for your body. And so it's wonderful that our bodies have that ability, to adapt and to change and to evolve in some respects. But I think it can work against us when we take that for granted and go, oh, because it's very easy to slip into a bad habit. It takes no time at all to develop a nasty habit. Yeah. It takes so long to undo it. And so that's one thing that, like you're saying, our bodies allow us to do that. There are people that say, oh, I've learned to function on 5 hours of sleep. Okay, true, you've learned, but one of the things that the course talked a lot about were the implications over the long term. And they use some great terminology that I just love. I'm such a word nerd, but they were talking about intoxication. Basically, you're intoxicated due to lack of sleep, and they likened it to a blood alcohol level of the legal limit. Mm-hmm. That's kind of scary because there's been a lot of research that's talked about. Well, they've done these studies on individuals that have gotten very little sleep and what their cognitive function is like. It's the same thing as if they were to be legally drunk.
Yeah.
And they're out there driving cars and watching kids and
that's kind of scary.
Doing things. And it's really frightening to think that when you put it in those terms, none of us would really advise anyone to drive drunk. So, well, at least I hope not. Why would we advise anyone to drive tired? And they talk a little bit about micro sleep. And it's like, you ever get in the car and you drive from point A to point B, and then you get to point B and you're like, did I actually stop at that stop sign? Or you don't actually remember traveling. That's micro sleep. Essentially, your brain has shut off, and it's due to the fact that you're overly tired and your body is starving for that moment of rest. And so eventually your body and your mind are going to take over. And that's when we're going to see accidents happen. And they used another term that I loved called cyber loafing.
Yes, I love that one too.
I loved that terminology. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I so know people that do that. I've done that. When you're so tired, you're dicking around on the internet or you're surfing Facebook. You're not doing anything productive. You're cyber loafing. It's because your brain does not have that cognitive capability to focus because it's not well rested or it's not well fed. Mm-hmm. So you can cyber loaf, or their social jet lag was another one that I loved. Mm-hmm. That part that they're talking about is like having so many social engagements or going out from this event to this event to this event. And we see this a lot during the holidays, which we're broaching this month. Mm-hmm. And then it's going to carry on through the beginning of January. And it's social jet lag. You're sacrificing sleep in order to engage in all of these events or do these things. And then what happens? Oh, people gain weight. Shocking.
It's sick. And then you have to stay home for 2 weeks and sleep anyway. So it's like, yeah.
It really is fascinating. So it is a variable that, we can absolutely adapt. We can adapt to lack of sleep, but the cost in the end, productivity, health, weight gain, just the mental stress, it's been linked to depression. So if there are people that are already kind of predisposed to maybe some sort of emotional challenge, and you add sleep deprivation on top of that, that will just increase that depressive syndrome even more.
Well, yeah, and it's hard. As we learned, we had a guy in our course that studies how it affects the workplace, and
loved that study.
Yeah, and he talked about how it impacts charisma in leaders, how it impacts decision making, and the cyber loafing. It causes employees to be just more highly distractible. And I think about that with personal trainers with their clients is you may not have a captive audience. Like you might be giving them these great tips and giving them good ideas and working out with them. But at the end of the day, if they're not getting enough sleep, it's really hard for them behaviorally to and you might be getting frustrated with them because they're not making changes, but they may not be able to make those changes. And the same goes for personal trainers. If you're not getting enough sleep, you might have a hard time promoting your business and marketing yourself and doing the things that you need to do because we just don't feel motivated when we're tired. Like, talk about a motivating habit, getting enough sleep and feel motivated.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved that I forget, was it Dr. Barnes? I can't remember the professor's name that had done that study on the workplace, but oh my gosh, so much compelling information. And I think it plays an important role and has great implications for people that do run a business. So if you're a personal trainer that owns a club or a studio, or you're just the average viewer watching the show and you have some sort of administrative position in an organization, think about the implications that has for your labor pool and for you as a supervisor. This guy specifically talked about how sleep-deprived leaders are jerks. Yeah?
Yeah, he used that word.
Yes, they are. I can absolutely, without a doubt, say that. And so that's important. So what can you do in your workplace or among your team to promote good habits, to promote a well-rested workforce? Mm-hmm. And I think that's important because you can incentivize it.
Yeah.
You know, and this individual had talked about supervisors like either using a carrot or a stick approach. And so, you know, incentivizing it so that don't answer emails after 7 p.m. If you do, and it's your supervisor gets a hold of that, it's like a demerit, or I don't know, you sit in the corner with a desk cap. I don't know what it is. But you can incentivize the workplace in such a way that you're going to get more out of your workers. They're going to have less time away from work due to illness. They're going to be more productive. They're not going to be wasting, you know, bandwidth surfing the internet while they're hanging out at their desk supposed to be working on a report, you know? So think about things that you can do in your workplace to incentivize it.
Yeah.
And even a study that he had talked about a workplace that, and I think Google does this. I could be completely wrong about that, but there were places where they had nap pods, like to promote, okay, if you're dinking around and not doing your job and you're super exhausted, go take a 15-minute cat nap and get your butt back to work. You know, promote a well-rested workforce, because how often do we sacrifice our own sleep and healthy habits to get the job done? In reality, you're not getting the job done.
Yeah, I know I can get just as much done in an hour on a rested night. Otherwise, it takes me like 3 hours to get my work done. Like I can write an article in 45 minutes to an hour or 2 hours the most if I'm rested. But if I'm not rested, it takes days to write an article. Like
it's agony.
So, you know, writer's block and stuff like that. Like if you want to be creative and produce, you know, articles and write courses or anything, you need that sleep. And speaking of the workforce, I'm going to throw up the Facebook group here. So we started a Facebook group for sleep so that all of us here at NFPT can support each other, and any of you trainers that are part of our family and friends can jump in, and we're going to be doing some fun things in that group, like reporting how much we're sleeping and talking a little bit about some of these different mechanisms over the next few weeks. Because I feel like these weeks coming up are the hardest of the year. The days are getting shorter. The time is changing on us, which throws us all off. And so we're just going to really try to support one another by using this group. So I threw that in there. And then before we wrap up today, let me see. I saw a bunch more comments pop up in here. Let's see here. Myra says, be with yourself. I find myself overcoming habits that were instilled in me as a baby. Oh, maybe you meant be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
Be with yourself. That's a good one. And she said also it takes time. And Angie says CBD oil is cannabis hemp oil. Not that you get the THC part, the other part. Maybe the THC part could help. Things that make you go home. Yeah, definitely. I feel like, and April says, great tips today. Cortisol levels interest me. I'll be more aware of them. Yeah, April, and we'll talk a lot next week about strategies that you can implement, little things that you can do.
Oh, sorry, Beth.
Yeah.
April, I was going to say, I would be curious to know, like, how long you've been doing the melatonin, like how that came about, and if you noticed, like, I guess my question would be if you haven't noticed a positive change, and that's one thing you've added, I would be curious, like, okay, what are some other tips that even our Facebook group can do to maybe help rectify whatever's going on? And I feel you, because my daughter's 2.5, and I swear she still doesn't sleep through the night. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, sometimes she does, but sometimes she doesn't. And so just that element of support, like you were saying with the Facebook group. But I would be curious, April, if that's something that you've been doing a long time and you're not noticing an improvement. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's a way we can help problem solve that. Or, you know, the course that we took actually, and I'm such a nerd, like I typed up like notes and I studied and printed off a bunch of different sites. So I think that's one thing that we can share too, or just different websites that are going to be great, reputable sources that might be able to help answer some of those deeper questions.
Definitely. Yeah. And we're getting kind of long today. So I think I'm going to cut us off here pretty soon. You know, and yeah, we'll join the group. Like there's so much to cover. That's part of why we decided we'd start a group, because we feel like sleep is really the missing habit in the industry. Like it's something we need to pay more attention to as trainers, and as exercise specialists, we should understand the physiology behind it, because that physiology is affecting the physiology that we're trying to change with people by getting them to eat better and exercise more. So understanding those hormones, especially cortisol, is a big one. And Kathleen wrote a really great article about cortisol too that I'll grab and throw in here if you want to learn more about it. But next week we're going to bring you some. So this week was kind of science-y and talking about the physiology. Next week we're going to talk about like the specific tips and habits. And you've probably heard of some of them before, but we're going to connect them in a little bit more of a meaningful way, I feel, that connects them back to the hormones we talked about this week. So it's not just like the same old like lavender before bed or whatever. There's some specific behavioral habits that you can change that can make a huge difference in your quality of sleep. So if anyone has any other things, I guess we did want to ask before we ended today, like, oops, I think we just kind of disappeared for a second. Anyway,
hello,
we're back. So what is your biggest sleep problem or hurdle or whatever? Throw it in there and we'll talk about it next week. Otherwise, join us next week. Please share this with everybody you know, because everybody needs to sleep better. And jump into that Facebook group. We'll be putting some questions up and information and links, and we'll put this video in there so you can share it with people. And join us next week, 11:30 Mountain Time, 1:30 Eastern Time. Is there anything else you want to say, my friend?
No, like you said, there's so much to cover and we could go on forever. But I definitely think if people do have specific concerns, like April, I want to dive into that melatonin question a little bit more, maybe in the Facebook group, or maybe even next week. Maybe I'll send you an email separately. But yeah, whatever problems you're having, I felt like the course that we took was really helpful because there was a platform for us to be able to share what our struggles are. And it's amazing how many struggles there are, and all of varying degrees. So I think it's important that we bring that to the surface. So if you do have concerns, please leave us a comment or send us a message, however you want to do it, and we'll be sure to try to help you out the best that we can.
Sweet. I'm going to throw up one more Halloween frame for fun at the end here. Live gives us all these Halloween frames we can use. So wrap up Halloween. Thanks for joining us, everyone. If you found this helpful, please share it and share the group. It's for everybody. And we will see you next week.
Yes.